Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. Today, we're joined by the wonderful Ali Schouten, who is the showrunner on the latest iCarly iteration and reboot. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about is it's such a fascinatingly unique and brilliant challenge to take characters that already exist and have had so many episodes of existing, and audiences have such a connection and an idea of who they are as well, and then to really think about who they are at this stage in their life with that gap in between. And so I was interested in how you and the rest of the creative team and the writers really stepped back and started that journey of filling in a lot of the time in between, because there is a lot of detail in the in between. You know, it's like we look at Freddie, he's had a kid, he's had two marriages, and then you carry him forth into this space and time, and you've done that with all of the characters in such interesting and different ways.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was just, as you were saying that, I was just thinking like it's a blast to do that. I was, you know, uniquely into dolls as a little girl. No one else had that interest. No, I loved playing with dolls as a little girl. And if you think about it, it's kind of a similar thing. I hope this is going to go to where I think it's going to go and make sense. I've never thought of this before. But you know, you have Barbie, right? And Barbie comes with her doctor kit or whatever one you got, and that's a character that already exists. But it's really up to you to play dolls and make up where she goes. So you have a set of parameters. You have Barbie, and then you get to decide what adventures she goes on. So I think it's a little bit like that. We had these amazing characters to start off with, but seeing where they would grow up, you know, was its own process that was a blast, because you're not starting from a blank page. You're starting from these beloved people that you want to honor, and you know these great actors are portraying them, and so it was a great process, and we definitely had a lot of iterations before we landed on it, and the actors from the original were involved in that development. So yeah, it was a good time.
And obviously one of the things that people have really attached themselves to is the voice and the tone of the show, because it was so specifically thought out that this isn't a new version of it for kids. This is for the kids that grew up with it. So this is an adult audience, and there's a lot of themes and topics. And yet when you look at it, it still carries forth the voice and the tone that it had as a kid show at the same time. And so how did you approach not necessarily just finding the more adult tone, but really thinking about how does that adult tone work with still pulling in lots of elements and callbacks and shout outs to all of that, because it's such a unique voice to really have to figure out for a show?
I would say we approached that numerously. Like we tried a lot of things that didn't work. You know, we had a lot of episodes where we were like, oh, this is such a great balance of the kid and the adult, and it leaned too kid, and we had to not do that, you know. And so it really is, we knew that was the big challenge, was threading that needle and respecting this great wacky weird tone, but also making sure that these are grown-up characters and that they're living experiences, you know, with that heightened twist, but that Miranda and her friends are living in real life. So it was a challenge, but I think that it was really worth it. You know, from the beginning, Miranda wanted this to be a show that she would watch, you know, that she and her friends could relate to. And so that was really exciting for me in terms of what I like to write anyway. And yeah, so we try to approach stories from a place where it's a grounded, relatable experience. And then we find what that, I call it the iCarly weird is of it. And so, for example, I use this example a lot, but it's kind of the clearest one in my mind, like the robot wedding episode. It was about, you know, the writer Kate Stayman London came up with the idea of, you know, when you go to someone's wedding who you don't particularly like and you go, why them and not me? You know, that's the core of that, you know, and it's very real, and people have been through that experience. And so then from there, you get into Carly believes Prunella is a robot, but you start from this more grounded place, and that could be any show about 27-year-olds, and then just kind of build up to that strangeness.
I also feel like in watching the show that grounded that journey of everything being rooted and feeling very grounded underneath the surface is also the way that the comedy works and the comedy lands as well. Because if you take that episode as well, the idea that she thinks that his bride to be is a robot is a really absurd concept on paper works comedically so well in so many ways, and yet it all comes back to what you were saying. It's the human emotion of being at someone's wedding and questioning yourself and your life and where you're at and what you want to be doing, and then you're able to have like the really beautiful moments like that one that you had with Freddie and Carly in that episode where they have that conversation about it. And so when you're thinking of the comedic elements of the show, which is obviously so much a part of every single episode as well, and the core of it, does it start with the grounded element that builds to the comedy for that reason?
Yes. Sometimes there'll be something where we're like, oh, we really want to use, I'm like trying not to spoil anything for season 2. We really want to use this character. And so we'll try to say, what's the most fun story we could do? But in the first season, they were all episodes that came out of, okay, we really want to do something with this space, with the annoying thing where I don't know how to fix my car, but don't you dare assume I don't know how to fix my car. Like just these really relatable things, and then just kind of spun them out. We have a classic sitcom dinner party episode, but the thing she makes is a pulsating raviolo. Like it's always finding those odd points along the way. I think we have one this season where we did start from a place of like, okay, let's start with something funny. And then we found the emotion after. But for the most part, I mean, I just think a story, no matter how goofy and weird a show is, doesn't really work unless there's some kind of a relatable emotional core to it.
I also feel like one of the other aspects of the show that works really well is that it does connect to audiences who have all that familiarity, and there's so many little details and call outs and shout outs, if it's a small detail or if it's something bigger, like recreating the meme moment from the first show. But at the same time, if an audience has never seen the show, never met these characters before, it still fully works. And so when you were putting together the writer's room, it sounds like you actually had a mix of people who had grown up with the show or had, kids or nieces or relatives that had watched it and had that level of familiarity. But was it just as important to you to have people in the room who had never seen it, so that if it got too inside baseball, that there were people to catch it and say, like, actually, that doesn't make sense if you don't know these characters or you don't know the show already?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know that I sought people out specifically for that reason, but I didn't ding people who didn't grow up with it. You know what I mean? That wasn't something. Of course, I wanted to have people who were super familiar with the property, and like lifelong fans. I call them the iCarly scholars in the room. Be like, all right, and so then we definitely need an iCarly scholar in that room when I'm splitting up the room for the day. And so I do think it's really important to have those people. And like you said, to have people who didn't necessarily grow up on it, but at the end of the day, it's good storytelling. So I just wanted to have the best writers, the best people, that's like, I always say, even with reading samples, some showrunners will be like, oh, it's great, but not the tone of this show. I'm like, I don't care. I can teach you how to go broader and double space the dialogue and write multicam. Like, I can't teach you how to write well. So I'd rather have somebody who has a great play or short story, or, even a more dramatic piece, but that really makes me think. And I'm like, that's a person who has a point of view that I want in my room. So I think it's about having different points of view all across the board. And then from there, yeah, we did have some people who, watched the show for the first time the night before their interview, to be honest. So.
And obviously, in working with Miranda Cosgrove, she's incredibly involved behind the scenes as well, and has, yeah. But I was interested in how you guys approached her character, with the fact that she was always someone, she had Sam by her side the whole time. So it was kind of like that duo aspect. And then how the two of you wanted to approach looking at her as a character who has always had that support system that's literally right by her shoulder, and then is stepping into this space and kind of finding her voice as herself in a more of an individual way, but still has a support system directly around her.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you were saying that and thinking about Miranda, the producer, and Carly, the character, in some ways, I think that duality exists right there in this go around, where we don't have Sam, but we do have Miranda to base some things on. And so it's interesting. I mean, she's going on this journey of revisiting a show called iCarly, just like Carly is. And she's doing it, without Sam / Jeanette, and she's really coming into her own independently, and she's having to do things that she didn't have to / get to do in the first go around. She's, the whole show is her. So I think that even just her being involved behind the scenes has provided some of that duality. And we love to use stuff from Miranda's life. I mean, she's very generous with telling us stories, and I don't want to like give anything away that she might want to keep close to the vest, but no, nothing like terrible or anything. She never thought anybody was a robot. That was made up. And but yeah, so she'll let us in on, for example, the ick was something that she pitched. That's something that she and her friends always say, and we kind of based that episode around that a little bit. And we're like, oh, that's great. We love that term. We love kind of the way they employ it and how it's that shorthand. And so we built that episode out from there.
And obviously, I know you can't give anything away for season 2 that you're working on at the moment, but you've talked a lot about how you want to explore certain themes and topics in a really kind of broad narrative sense, like the idea that she is a young woman on the internet, and what does that mean to be a creator on the internet, particularly in this day and age, and some of what that can mean, whether someone is known or not. And so are you thinking differently about how you're approaching the overall scope of like the larger themes and topics now that you've reestablished these characters, and you can think in that way a little bit differently now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was really all about establishing who these people are, and just the most fun stories for that. And now I think we can definitely get into some of those more specific themes in her career and in all of their careers, really.
I also wanted to ask about the character of Millicent, because Jayden does such a great job at it. But I think the way that you found the voice of that character is interesting, because she is a child and yet she has this real maturity, because she is a character that we see from the show spends the majority of her time around other adults more than she spends time with her own peers. And so did that idea that she's around these characters really influence a lot of what her voice and her dialogue ended up being as a character?
It did. I also think that Jayden herself influence that character. Originally we conceived of it as really like a little Wednesday Addams, April from Parks and Rec type of super, monotone, blasé. And Jayden has this bubbly energy that's so funny, contrasted with some of those more cutting lines. And she's just got this great sarcasm but also these kid moments when she's just like really excited about something. She really wants a dog, or she really wants a fish. So I think moving forward, we also want to make sure we take care of those kid moments and even look at that as a theme, the idea of she is around all these adults all the time, and she is this more mature kid, but she's still a kid. So that's something in the second season that I think we deal with more directly, because there is a tendency, and I think in the first half of the season, we fell into this of just like, it's cute to see a cute little girl. It's funny to see a cute little girl be mean. And it's like, we would always go to just like the mean joke. And there's just a lot more to her, and a lot more to Jayden, obviously, than being able to absolutely devastate you, which, she can, but she's not going to do it just to be mean. But if you give her the line, she'll do it. But yeah, so I think that having a little bit more of that kid stuff, and not just like the precocious mean girl element as we move along. We'll still have those roasts, but
also by introducing her in that way at the beginning, it made some of the payoffs later in the season that much sweeter. The moment where she gives money to Freddie from her own pocket money and is like, I want to invest in you. And you look at the journey that the two of them have taken throughout the entire series, where at the beginning she's like, you're not my dad. Like, stop bothering me. And then by the end, she's like, I believe in you.
That was the moment I wanted to do, like from the beginning of the season. I was like,
yeah,
this idea, it's $13. Like, and I would forget about it and come back to it. And then I realized we had this perfect moment for it. I was like, yes, the $13.
But yeah, because like I saw you tweeted about that, and because that was something that you had been thinking about and germinating on the entire season, how much of a sense did you have of ultimately where you wanted the trajectory of these characters to build to by the end of the season? Because you're still working on the scripts towards the end of the season when you start shooting the beginning. so obviously you don't have all of the details finite, but how much was helpful to really lay the groundwork for and foundation for, and to have a sense so that you could have multiple moments like that where then you have one tiny gesture that suddenly speaks to the entire show?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stuff we had in mind, and some of it really came up as we were looking at those last three stories. And our production schedule was tight, and we were often adapting on the fly. So I can't say everything was meticulously planned out in terms of the serialization. We really just we're so focused on the characters and capturing the energy of the show. And iCarly, the original, wasn't a super serialized show. There were elements, but it was also pretty episodic. So this season, we've done more mapping out and more, we took that first week in the room to really say, here's where we want to get to with each character, and here are the kind of milestones along the way. And we just broke a really great evergreen episode. And so then for the next one, I was like, all right, it's time to like get back into our serialized elements. So if 5 is this, then 6 is that. And yeah, so I think that, we're never going to be lost, but we can have these elements where you can look at Carly in the pilot and Carly at the end of season 2, 3, 5, however many we go, and say like she's grown, and maybe it's in a way that it sneaks up on you. But I think with Millicent especially, we can do that a little more clearly.
Something I love in looking at the adult characters in this show is that they're all at different levels of success in what they're doing, and yet they're all doing something that they're incredibly passionate about. So if we look at Harper at the beginning, she's not where she wants to be at all, but she still is trying to find a way to pursue that thing. Freddie hasn't succeeded as an entrepreneur. He's had failures in it. Financially, things are a little bit difficult, but he's still working on it. And none of them are kind of doing that. They go to work for 9 to 5. And because of that, it also allows a lot more richness in the way that it's written into their characters and written into their story as well. What was the genesis of the moment that it felt really important that was part of the track for all of these characters collectively?
We just were looking at, this is a group of creative people in a major city. If we're looking at what Carly, Freddie, and Spencer were doing, it felt natural that Harper would also be a creative person. I was a barista for 2 years when I moved to LA. So Harper's a barista before she got her creative career off the ground. I mean, that's really as basic as you can get. I really love Harper. Like, as much as I love playing in the sandbox of the old show, like Harper and Millicent are also really exciting to me because they're wholly our own, and those actors have really shaped who they are and what we write for them, and that's really exciting as well. But that was really the idea, is that we wanted to show these different phases of it, and I think that it's not all linear. We might, I don't know, but like we could see Harper back at Skybucks at some point for a few weeks between jobs. I remember when I got out of grad school and I got an offer for my old job at the cupcake shop for less money per hour. And I was like, oh God, like, this is so bad. So I think that we could see a lot of forward and back for these characters. But I think right now we're really excited that Harper and Freddie are doing better in their careers, and we want to play in that a little bit. And so now it's more about like what challenges might Carly be facing in hers. Like, she's gotten it off the ground. She's kind of coasting. She's doing well. She won an award, even if it was kind of bullshit. But what are the ups and downs in her job? And maybe the tables have turned, and the people who weren't doing as well now are doing really well. And what does that look like for them?
And the award she gets in the finale is in the middle of the woods, and,
Yes.
and your production team had to obviously fully build that location.
My God.
And it's really interesting though when you think about locations in terms of where we see these characters, because we have the crux of the show, which is all of these characters in this loft setting, and it's a space that they're incredibly familiar with, and there's a real intimacy to the way that they are. And then when you take them to an episode like that, where you bring them out to the woods, or you bring them to a wedding and you take them outside of that, there's a different way in which you can explore them, because they're outside of their comfort zone as well. So as well as just thinking about what would make an interesting setting and location, are you also thinking about the difference in the way that you can explore characters depending on what that location is as well?
Yes, I can't say a lot on that question, but yes, I had a meeting with the set designer this morning, and like, first of all, that forest, I mean, he's like the forest guy. So I was expecting it to be great, but I mean, that was unreal. And there were like, it was real greenery. Like there'd be people watering the set when we were done for the day. It was wild. So yeah, I mean, we obviously saw some really great stuff last season, and yeah, I think that um, the environments that we put them in very much are part of the storytelling, and like there are, I think, some upcoming visual jokes in the set, and like even sets that were at one time where you'll just be able to kind of like look and find funny things all throughout them. I mean, they do a really great job, our production design team.
And when it comes to working in multicam, it's such an interesting format to work in because obviously there's a huge amount of history to it and there's kind of a stylistic expectation from the audience as well. And yet the way that it exists now has evolved over the years. And so particularly with this show, it follows those kind of like basic rules and basic format elements. And yet there's all these ways in which you play around with it, whether it's the way that you're telling a story, even what you were talking about earlier, where you'll have the moments where it feels very like singularly episodic, but then more narrative structure built at the same time, or even just certain camera choices and camera movements that maybe wouldn't be traditional to multicam. And so particularly in working in collaboration with the directors as well, is that something that you're cognizantly talking about in terms of how you can take this format and this idea, but also find the spaces where you can play with it, but also where it still feels like you need to kind of keep yourself constrained a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm left to my own devices, it'll be two people sitting at a bar talking, and I would just write plays, and so I always have to push myself for like those more physical bits and thinking about what's the visual here. So I think that there's always a lot of collaboration from all the different departments. And from the directors and the writers room, people who, again, we were talking about like point of view, wanting to bring like, I know I need people in the room who are going to pitch that great physical gag because it's not necessarily at the forefront of my mind. So yeah, I think that overall, we always are trying to evolve, and that means evolving with the style a little bit too. I mean, the original one was essentially a hybrid. They didn't shoot in front of an audience. They were always doing all sorts of like cool stunts and trick shots and everything. So I think we don't want to take a step backward from that. So that's how we ended up with stylistically what we have. And I think, a lot of people that we have done both single and multicam. So their minds go to, what if we did a montage here? What if we did this, Nasser Samara was the one who pitched the idea of doing the documentary. And he had pitched it as like the whole episode. And then it fell away. And then when we were thinking of tags for that, I was like, let's do the documentary. Yes. Like, let's do Nasser's documentary. That's gonna be so cool and like a little bit different. So I think just making sure you have people in the room who will pitch those ideas that, yeah, maybe I would do a really traditional multicam where it's like, got it, 3 scenes per act, and and it's people talking in a room, and that's great, and we need that, and I'm really good with structure that way, but also just having other people who think outside the box a little bit and saying like, wait, why can't we do that? Let's do that. We love to write songs in our room, so a lot of music, a lot of original music.
And then lastly, I wanted to ask you about some of your other writing experience, because you've written on a huge myriad of shows. And I think Diary of a Future President is a really perfect example of really great writing for kids television that also works for an adult audience, because the way that it speaks to kids is, again, has a maturity to it. It's not patronizing to its audience at all. It's willing to explore really rich themes and topics. And at the same time, it's doing it, on that right level. And so when you're writing for a show like that, what are kind of the internal checks and balances of always trying to figure out what that line is? How adult can we take something in the way that we're exploring it? What's the language that we need to use in order to do this, to really strike that balance of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two different answers I want to give to that. One is just for like the appropriateness thing. I never censor myself. There are so many people whose job it is to make sure that I don't put something inappropriate for the audience watching this show. And especially on iCarly, like they're hoping to get, teenagers and stuff, but they definitely, I never see the notes from standards. They fight, like the studio execs will fight for us and fight for jokes they like. And I usually get no notes. And then sometimes they'll be like, oh, we fought them on this, but like, we got to take out the joke where like Carly does heroin. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. No, we'd never had a Carly does heroin joke, but you know what I mean? Like, I saw this on Young and Hungry, which was my first show. Like, sometimes we put stuff in and be like, there's no way this gets passed. And then it did. And it was a beloved joke. So we may as well go for it. Now, I think when looking at that show, one thing we were very careful with, like, we didn't censor ourselves. Like, I wrote a bunch of jokes in the school play episode where it's like actually about the drama teacher's divorce. And like, that was just, it was made the room laugh. So we were like, yeah, kids will get it, like whatever. But we were really careful that the messages we were sending about this Latinx family, about this character's coming out, that those things were handled in a way where we had a lot of discussions about, there's definitely merit to the, everything is totally fine and everyone loves each other, love fest coming out story, or the really tough coming out story. But like, where are we falling on that scale? What's going to be most useful for our audience? What's going to give people who maybe are watching this and confused about their own sexuality and not sure where they fall on the spectrum of sexuality, and not maybe aware that there is a spectrum of that and that you're not just like one thing or another. And, getting into those kinds of conversations, that's where we really took care. In terms of like, can we swear or not? I'm like, yeah, if it makes the line funnier because the rhythm is better, put it in and we'll see. I think we even like beeped a couple times on Young and Hungry just because we were like, it's funnier. It's funnier she would say, oh shit, right here. And let's just beep it. So I think like, I never really try to hold back on that, where I think those conversations were better to use your time on like, is this what we want to say about this character? Is this what we want to say to our audience about this character and this kind of story? And that's where like, I don't think you can talk too much about that. Like, I think you always want to make sure everyone in the room is like really excited about the story you're putting forward when it comes to things like that.
I feel like hearing you say all of that and describe all of that kind of internal conversation is why you have been the perfect person to show run and reboot iCarly.
Wow, I love you. You're so nice. You're saying things I'm like, I never thought of it that way. Yeah, I'm really smart.
But genuinely, I think the reboot has done such a fantastic job at really kind of being the first show out of its gate to do what it's doing in terms of figuring out that really specific voice and audience relationship in this time frame, and really kind of taking care of people that grew up with it. So I want to say congratulations on all that you've achieved. Really excited for everything to come in season 2 that you obviously can't say anything about yet. Thank you so much, Ali.
I'm excited too. That's all I'll say. Like, I'm so excited for season 2. It's just been really fun. And the stories that we're putting together, there's a lot more stories to tell, and I'm excited about it.